There was a little journey arriving to that theme. Originally, the theme that was requested was not. It was very different. It was a very ethereal, very not catchy, very almost dreamy and experimental. And as I got about 2 months into the game, and I started hearing little voice like a dialogue. I started hearing some of the banter of Colt and Juliana and some of the sarcasm, and then I started seeing and hearing some of the NPCs, the non-playable characters, kind of make comments, and I started to see there's this vibrant personality in the game that just didn't take itself seriously, and it just felt so, I don't know, catchy and approachable. And I said, this music needs to be the same way. And it's certainly because of the theme of the whole game is that you are in this endless loop, so I'm like, can I find another simple chord progression and another simple melody that sounds somewhat original in some way, even though there's somewhat familiarity about it? Can I do that? So I just sat there and just kept on hoping and just going with the flow, and I just kind of found those 4 chords, and eventually playing around, I'm like, okay, there's something new about this in some little way that's just fresh enough. So that was the birth of it. And then allowing myself to go into the sandbox of 60s instruments and effects, late 60s, actually, very specific, 68 to 71. It allowed me to kind of journey back and do a lot of, rediscovery and research.
Music has always been this really, to use Tom's analogy, a giant sandbox. And I have always really loved all sorts of music, just from my exposure to different things. So with Psychonauts, that provided an opportunity to, to really explore just about anything I've ever liked. So that was, I think the challenge was making it all hang together. And in the case of Psychonauts 2, well, it is Psychonauts 2, so there was a Psychonauts 1. And so I had those, I had already a lot of themes from the first game to work with, but it's worth talking, I think, about the process of how those themes evolved in the first game.
Yeah.
That kind of goes back to my work on Grim Fandango, which you mentioned earlier. But anyway, so I used to have a little handheld cassette recorder. It's an iPhone now, but handheld cassette recorder, and I would hum things into it. And with Psychonauts 1, I was still using those cassettes. And my test is, if you've hummed the theme and you step away from it for a while, maybe next day you press play and you listen to your little cassette recorder. If it still grabs you, then maybe it's worth taking to the next step, right? What I would do is, once I had something that I liked, I'd play it on the piano with singing it at the same time, and then send, in the early days of Psychonauts, I don't know how I sent them to Tim Schafer, the legendary game designer. But somehow I did, because MP3s, I think, weren't invented or just barely invented. But the point is, if you can play it and you can sing it in that crude form, and the game designer goes, "Yeah, I like that," then you can do something with that melody. And so, I mean, there is a risk, which is occasionally you turn on your iPhone, you hear yourself going, "Yeah," and you have no idea what it is that you were actually humming. It can be very frustrating, because it seemed like, Beethoven's Ninth at the time, and now it's garbage. But anyway, that's the risk.
So my process is very much here, usually in the beginning, like Tom was talking about how he starts with. It's, again, the playfulness, the sandbox. I usually just myself bring a bunch of different instruments into the studio, different instruments that will correlate or that have something to do with that specific project I'm working with. in case of Narcos was like the cuatro, the, you know, charangos, ronrocos, the different instruments that were, and then I just play around with them. I play and I record, I bow them, I bang on them, I play percussion on them, I do different, and then I bring those into Contact or whatever sampler you're using, and I start chopping up sounds and finding and bringing it 3 octaves down, 3 octaves up, adding reverb, doing so just, and I create software instruments that will then be a part of the entire score. So that's usually the beginning of the whole thing. It's a way for me to make something unique, something that you won't be able to hear anywhere else, that, but will also dictate what the sound and the soundscape of my score will be.
Can you speak to younger artists on how to delve deep and how to find and hone your unique individual voice? I'm going to start with you, Pedro.
Well, I think first of all is just trusting your ears and trusting yourself, right? We have especially here, if you're in Hollywood and starting out, you get whatever short film you get has temp music in there, and you're driven to just copy stuff, or to just, you know, you're pushed to like, oh, can it be more like this? The editors are working with it. The director has been listening to it for a long time, and it just becomes an intricate part of the scene, and sometimes it's hard to get away from it. So I think sometimes the voice needs to be found, whether you're doing a composition on your own and just exercising your muscles and just trying to do something for yourself, especially if you're starting out, you know, that's what you do in school, or finding young filmmakers where you can get the music to them as soon as possible before there's already temp music in there, or just finding a way where you can actually not try to copy someone else's music, but try to develop your own voice. And I know it's hard, and maybe your own voice comes from copying a bunch of different, which is what I had to do. I started with trailer and commercials, and they thought I was great for like the romantic comedy stuff. God knows now no one calls me for romantic comedy.
It is a challenge to, especially when you're in situations where you're given something, you know, sound like this, please.
Yeah.
I think there are two things I would say. One is you are the sum of your experiences, and everybody's experiences are the same. So if you can channel, for me, it's a lot of it is where I've lived. I've lived a lot of places, and I know that affects me. For someone else, it might be another different kind of experience they have. But if you really can just kind of meditate on who you are and where you've been, I think you'll find that you have something to say that other people don't. And I think the key there is just listen. Like if you close your eyes and you listen and you think, what do I want to hear? Or you take a walk, so you're not near any instruments, you're not near your favorite sample set or whatever, and you're just with yourself or with your, you know, your own little mental world. To me, that's a good way to access maybe one's own voice. I
think so. It's important to just trust in this process and follow your bliss in a certain way. You know, I do agree with the idea that, you know, if you love something, for example, if you just seem to really love a certain kind of music, listen to it very closely, copy it. That's how I actually learned. The best education I've ever received was when I was young, listening and then starting to imitate stuff. I started on piano. I'd come, whether it be on television, playing my cartoon themes, or going to the arcade and trying to recreate the theme to Dig Dug. I literally would just, you know, copy and listen and copy. And then I got into synthesizers, and then I started learning. I love Depeche Mode. And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to copy that with my little Roland JX3P. And then, you know, and that this evolved and evolved. And I just have learned to do so many different things. And that does become the sum of your personality, your experiences, and seen through my own unique perspective, my own lens, my own musical fingerprint, my own personality. You find out that you do have a voice.